The Narcissist, Reading You Part 2. Where lesser and mid-range narcissists struggle in their reading of people that they engage with, it is also complicated by their negativity bias. This disqualifies the positive, so that the narcissist ends up believing that they have actual evidence for all of the negative things that they believe about that individual. Things that are neutral, or even possibly benign, become viewed through the lens of black to be seen as negative, and therefore viewed as harmful, selfish, or hurtful. That means that people are viewed as selfish and harmful, which amounts to a threat to control. The narcissist will invariably believe that nobody cares about them. This system that is essentially set up to dismiss everything as just more evidence that other people are bad, unsafe, uncaring, and untrustworthy, results in seeing repeated threats to control. Disqualifying the positive specifically works as a negative feedback loop to reinforce the belief that everybody is poor, bad, treacherous, traitorous, uncaring, untrustworthy, because that is how the narcissist sees the world. Because by viewing the world in that way, it ensures that the narcissist is hypervigilant to the necessity of asserting control. The narcissist, particularly lesser or mid-range, then fails to recognize positive experiences that would contradict the negative feedback loop. Therefore, it is common for individuals to talk about the fact that they distrust other people and wondering, why do they think that I'm horrible? Why do they think that I hate them? Why do they think that I'm trying to harm them? And therefore, they question the nature of the relationship that they have. Again, there is a misreading of the intentions and behaviors of the non-narcissist, which become seen through the distortion field as repeated threats to control. That neutral and even benign behaviors are seen in a way as potentially hostile to the narcissist, and therefore the narcissist queries why would they stay involved in a relationship with someone who is untrustworthy and treacherous, somebody that is out to harm them, and thus this amounts to a disengagement trigger. Because of the narcissistic viewpoint, through the alternative reality, through their distortion field, this results in an impaired ability to engage in what is essentially reality testing, and therefore impacts upon the ability to communicate. Reality testing is where you evaluate your reaction, thoughts, and conclusions against what has happened to see if they are accurate and appropriate. In effect, it's something that non-narcissists do by way of reflection. It's some form of fact check, and enables to allow a person to distinguish between what is the reality and what is actually fear or a hope or a wish or a belief. Commonly, I explain to you how important it is for you to have regard to the evidence as against to what is being driven by emotional thinking. The human ego, generally, can sometimes have difficulties knowing the difference between what is reality and what is actually a fear, particularly with the surge of emotional thinking. That it fails to distinguish between what is a reality and a hope or a wish or a belief. And therefore, by applying a process of metacognition and the application of logic, that individual is then able to undertake a reality fact check. The narcissist does not do so, because the narcissist operates within their own reality. And therefore, an example of this fact-checking is, let us say, for instance, that you send a text to a friend and they don't respond as promptly as they ordinarily might do so. A logical, fact-based response to that would be, well, they must be busy. I'm sure they'll get back to me in due course. But what can happen is that emotional thinking causes you to think, maybe they're mad at me. Perhaps they're upset with me, even though there's no actual evidence. I experience that on a repeated basis, where people will send me an email, and because they've not heard from me within a matter of a couple of hours, they automatically assume that somehow they've upset me, that somehow that I'm angry or mad with them, even though there is no evidence whatsoever to support that. And indeed, there is plenty of evidence to explain that it is only a couple of hours, and a man so busy as I is unlikely to be able to respond to each and every email. I routinely point out to these individuals that having received over 1,000 emails and comments and communications a day, that if I was to spend roughly 5 minutes on each one reading and replying to them, that would mean I would need 33 hours to deal with them all. That shows how ridiculous it is to expect a response to everything that is sent to me. But those individuals do it, and they do it because they fall into that position of failing to distinguish between a fact-based situation and being led by their emotional thinking and their fear or their hope or their wish or a belief. Instead, by engaging in reality testing, i.e. applying logic, that enables an individual to evaluate the situation objectively so that they can then see, actually, there isn't any evidence for the conclusion that HG is angry with me or that this friend is upset with me and that's why they've not replied. The problem is that invariably people are led by their feelings and not facts. And therefore, when you analyze it and go to facts, you see that you don't have enough information to come to the conclusion that you reached, and that there are actually other conclusions and interpretation of the facts that are possible. And therefore, your conclusion isn't something that you must accept as reality, since there is a legitimate possibility that it might actually not be. The narcissist, however, especially the lesser and mid-range, are not structured to include that capability. Instead, the evidence goes through their distortion field and tells them the outcome that is required to get to the prime aims. The ability of the narcissist to test their conclusions against reality is impaired because it is not tested against the reality that you understand, but is tested instead against the reality that is manufactured by the narcissism. Thus, when the narcissist, especially lesser or mid-range, reads the behaviors of an individual, rather than assess that what is being said or the tone of it in a way that accords with a reality check, it simply goes into the narcissist's reality, and the starting point is to assume that there is a problem and that it is hostile, and therefore the narcissism needs to take action. That is why even what may seem as the most innocuous of actions can be viewed by the narcissist as a threat, resulting in the responses that you are all too familiar with. There are instances where you can accept that there are other reasons a person might do or not do something that has nothing to do with you. But the narcissist is not set up to truly understand this, and it is difficult for them to conceptualize that this is actually reality. They don't see it, and telling them and trying to explain it doesn't assist because it amounts to a threat to control. Lesser and mid-range narcissists in particular are not really able to grasp that other people have lives and motives and feelings, many of the things that have nothing to do with the narcissist, because the narcissist is set up to believe that everything revolves around them. When they're told that, they simply cannot process it, and thus cannot believe it. In their perception, it's impossible that this is the case, and therefore people must be lying. If you recall, for instance, when you first saw a teacher outside of school, perhaps, you may come to have then realized, oh, they have a life outside of school. Or that you had the realization that when you read an article about a pop star, that, oh, actually, they do the ordinary things like water the garden and go to Waitrose. Your relationship with that pop star hitherto was one where you only saw them in concert, saw them when they were giving interviews, read about their interviews, almost as if they sat in a box doing nothing but write songs, perform songs, undertake interviews and go on tour. And then you have the reality that they do other things, that they exist outside of how they relate to you and your experiences with them. It's similar in the way that a narcissist reads you, especially lesser and mid-range, whereby the lesser or mid-range narcissist ends up believing that you don't have a life outside of catering to their needs. It may seem rather ridiculous, but it is the case. The narcissist believe that you're there to provide the narcissist with what he or she needs. This is why babies start off as narcissistic. They, in effect, are wholly reliant upon a caregiver who they believe whose simple purpose is there to feed them, to clothe them, to bathe them, to give them something to drink, to soothe them, to help them get off to sleep, to regulate their temperature. That baby does not realize that that caregiver has a life outside of them. Although, of course, from what I understand about child rearing, it does indeed appear to be the case that that individual spends most of their time catering to the needs of that child. Over time, the child is taught and develops its empathy, where it understands that that person has other demands upon its time, and that sharing, cooperation, patience, etc., ought to come about. But that never happens with the narcissist. They simply read the behavior of that individual through the lens of believing that they should cater to all of the needs of the narcissist and to nothing else, and a failure to do so is thus deemed to be a threat to control. The narcissist doesn't care about, consider, or even recognize that people are people who live outside of the narcissist. Their reading of them is to believe that their sole function is to do anything and everything for the narcissist. They're not able to understand and consider that fact. This is why the narcissist sees people as appliances that are waiting to be utilized, ready to when the narcissist chooses to engage with them. It's also part of what is behind the narcissist's egocentric belief that whatever they are thinking about, or concerned about, or care about, must be on the mind of everybody else, and therefore it creates a blindness and a selfishness to other people's perspectives, needs, and lives. I shall continue with my analysis of the way that the narcissist reads you in part 3. Join me there.